Fisker. Every company in this video made a promise to investors and failed to keep it. Henrik Fisker's was specific: 42,000 Ocean SUVs in 2023. He built 10,193. Fewer than 5,000 reached a customer. That gap between what he promised and what he delivered set the template for everything that followed. The cars that did ship had problems. Brakes failed. Vehicles rolled away unattended. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened 4 separate investigations, including one into what happened when drivers tried to leave the car. The Ocean had a defect where the doors wouldn't open from inside. He named his second EV company after himself again, just in case anyone forgot who was responsible the first time. A new car costs about $40,000. Fisker lost $762 million in a single year. That's enough to buy 19,000 cars, nearly twice as many as they actually delivered. Fisker is often lumped in with startups that never shipped anything. They actually built over 10,000 vehicles. The problem is what those vehicles did to the people who bought them. Fisker filed Chapter 11 in June 2024. When the company died, the software died with it. Cars that had already been sold were remotely bricked, leaving owners with vehicles they couldn't drive, sell, or in some cases, exit. The cars had a feature where the doors wouldn't open. Fisker called it a defect. In a horror movie, they'd call it the plot. Fisker's cars are still out there. Some owners can't sell them, can't get them fixed, and depending on the software update, can't always get out of them. Electric Last Mile Solutions. When ELMS went public in 2021, the plan was electric delivery vans, a SPAC valuation, and a future in commercial fleet vehicles. The CEO and the chairman resigned on the same day in February 2022. Not because the company was failing, because of what an internal investigation had found they'd done before it went public. CEO James Taylor and Chairman Jason Luo had purchased equity in the company at substantial discounts ahead of the SPAC merger. The SEC confirmed the insider trading in March 2022. If you're going to commit securities fraud, the minimum viable requirement is probably a company that'll survive long enough for the stock to be worth something. ELMS couldn't raise new capital. No leadership, no product, an active SEC investigation. It filed Chapter 7 in June 2022, roughly 12 months after going public. The SEC investigation took longer than the company existed. From IPO to Chapter 7 in 12 months. Even by EV startup standards, that's efficient. Lordstown Motors. At its peak, the company was valued at $5.3 billion. It claimed more than 100,000 pre-orders for the Endurance electric pickup. The SEC later charged them with misleading investors, and the company went bankrupt in 2023. But the real story isn't the bankruptcy. It's what those 100,000 orders actually were. Hindenburg Research ran the numbers and found that between 40 and 71% of those pre-orders came from entities that didn't operate vehicle fleets or existed only on paper. Some of those 100,000 fleet customers consisted of one person and a laptop. 100,000 trucks at $40,000 each would represent $4 billion in revenue. The actual number of legitimate orders could have fit in a single parking lot. Lordstown's pre-orders weren't just inflated. The SEC found that many came from companies that existed only on paper or had single employees. CEO Steve Burns resigned. The company agreed to pay $25.5 million in disgorgement. They named their truck the Endurance. It lasted about as long as a phone battery in winter. Lordstown paid $25.5 million to settle with the SEC. That's roughly what they spent pretending people wanted their truck. Every one of these companies told the same story. We just need a little more capital and we'll change the world. The capital kept coming. The world didn't change. Arcimoto. The company made a 3-wheeled electric vehicle in Eugene, Oregon called the FUV, which stood for Fun Utility Vehicle. During the EV SPAC bubble of early 2021, the market cap hit $1.2 billion. By July 2024, the entire company was worth $3,690, less than a used Honda Civic. They raised $50 million during the height of the bubble by selling additional stock. then used the money to buy manufacturing facilities. They raised $50 million to buy factories, then discovered they couldn't afford to turn the lights on. Production halted in February 2023. At its peak, Arcimoto was worth $1.2 billion. By the end, the company's total market value, $3,690, wouldn't cover a month's rent in Eugene, the city where they were headquartered. The stock fell from $28 a share to 15 cents. The ticker was FUV. Investors eventually agreed with the sentiment. Arcimoto's entire company became worth less than a single Tesla Model 3. Faraday Future. $3.4 billion raised. 16 FF91 vehicles delivered as of early 2025. The promise gap kept getting wider. Faraday Future raised $3.4 billion and delivered 16 cars. The founder, Jia Yueting, had fled China in 2017 while owing billions from the collapse of his previous company, Likola. He convinced American investors to back his next venture, a $309,000 luxury EV to compete directly with Tesla. They delivered 10 cars in 2023, 4 in 2024, and 2 in 2025. $3.4 billion, 16 cars. That's $212 million per vehicle delivered. For that price, you could buy every car on a dealership lot and the building the dealership sits in. $212 million per car. Even Rolls-Royce would call that excessive. The SEC investigated Faraday Future for years and actually cleared them. The fraud case everyone expected never came together. The incompetence was genuine. The company's name is Faraday Future. At 16 cars total, the future part was doing a lot of heavy lifting. As of 2025, Faraday Future is still technically alive. It just hasn't figured out how to build cars yet. If you find these kinds of corporate disasters interesting, I cover stories like this every week. Hitting subscribe helps me keep making them. Thanks. Canoo. The company raised $595 million across multiple funding rounds, pivoted from consumer to commercial electric vehicles, landed partnerships with NASA and Walmart, and filed Chapter 7 in January 2025 with $232,000 remaining in the bank. They had NASA and Walmart as partners. Canoo had both and still managed to burn through every dollar. $595 million in, $232,000 out. That's a burn rate of roughly $1 million every 2 days for 3 years. When the assets went up for sale, Aquila's entity offered $4 million for everything that remained. In any other industry, that's called picking through the wreckage. In Silicon Valley, it gets described as a pivot. Tony Aquila spent $595 million building Canoo. Then he bought it back for $4 million. That's a 99.3% discount. Arrival. The company had Hyundai, Kia, and BlackRock as institutional investors. It had a purchase order from UPS. It went public via SPAC in 2021 at a valuation of $13.6 billion. Arrival took the promise gap to its logical extreme. $13.6 billion and 0 deliveries. The company's plan was to build electric delivery vans using microfactories, smaller and more flexible manufacturing facilities instead of traditional large-scale auto plants. Arrival's microfactory concept was treated as an industry breakthrough when it was announced. In practice, it meant they never built a facility large enough to produce anything at commercial scale. $13.6 billion, 0 vehicles. The math on a cost per vehicle doesn't work because you'd be dividing by 0. Dividing $13.6 billion by 0 gives you infinity. Arrival was delisted from the Nasdaq in January 2024 and filed for bankruptcy in Luxembourg in May 2024. Even in death, Arrival couldn't pick a winner. Arrival's assets went to Canoo. Canoo filed for bankruptcy 8 months later with $232,000 in the bank. The EV startup circle of life. At some point, the question stops being, why did this company fail, and starts being, why did anyone believe them in the first place? Proterra. The company had raised over $1.3 billion in combined venture capital and SPAC funding by the time it filed Chapter 11 in August 2023. But Proterra is the one entry on this list that actually built something. Over 1,300 electric buses, sold to transit agencies across North America. Real vehicles, real customers, real daily use. And it still went bankrupt. Investors included Daimler, Kleiner Perkins, Soros Fund Management, and GM Ventures. Jennifer Granholm sat on its board before becoming the U.S. Secretary of Energy. A former board member became the U.S. Energy Secretary. The company filed for bankruptcy anyway. That's a networking success and a business failure in the same sentence. Proterra's failure gets attributed to management decisions. The structural problem was the business model. Building electric buses costs more than transit agencies can pay, and government subsidies never fully covered the gap. Proterra proved you could build a genuinely good electric vehicle, sell 1,300 of them, have the energy secretary on speed dial, and still lose everything. Proterra's buses are still running in cities across America. The company that built them is not. Byton. Former BMW and Nissan executives. $1.2 billion from Foxconn, FAW Group, and Marubeni. And a 48-inch touchscreen mounted across the full width of the dashboard. Byton spent years perfecting that screen. They just never got around to finishing the car it was supposed to go in. The M-Byte debuted at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2018, and the screen was the event. 48 inches across the entire dashboard, plus a second display embedded in the steering wheel. The M-Byte had a 48-inch screen. Most people don't have a television that big in their living room. Byton put one in a car that doesn't exist. Foxconn signed on as a manufacturing partner, ran due diligence, and then pulled out. Both of Byton's Nanjing-based subsidiaries filed for bankruptcy in 2023. $1.2 billion. For that amount, you could buy every house on several blocks of a small American town. Byton used it to build a screen. They hired BMW executives. They hired Nissan executives. They raised $1 billion. The only thing anyone remembers about Byton is that screen, in a car last seen rotting in a lot somewhere in Northern California. Somewhere in Northern California, a Byton M-Byte prototype is sitting in a parking lot. Its 48-inch screen dark. $1 billion movie with no audience. Nikola. At its peak, the company was valued at $3.3 billion. Its founder, Trevor Milton, was convicted of securities and wire fraud in October 2022 and sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay $661 million in restitution. Then, he and his wife donated $1.8 million to a presidential campaign, and in March 2025, he was pardoned, the sentence and the restitution erased with it. The company was named Nikola, which is the first half of Tesla's name. The actual Tesla company builds cars that drive themselves. This company built a truck that could only move with help from gravity. The demonstration video from 2018 showed the Nikola 1 rolling smoothly along a road. Hindenburg Research later documented what had actually happened. The truck had been towed to the top of a hill and filmed rolling down it. The driver's only job was to not touch the brakes. At its peak, Nikola employed 874 people. By December 2025, one remained, the liquidating trustee. That's one employee gone every 9 hours for an entire year. 1.8 million in donations erased 661 million in restitution. That's a 367-to-1 return on investment. It might be the only thing at Nikola that ever delivered value. Every company on this list had a promise gap. Nikola's was the widest. They promised a working truck. They delivered a vehicle that could only move in one direction, downhill. If you want to see more stories like these, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.